Hi, good morning everybody, and welcome to this session on what will the world of research look like in 10 years' time. It's part of a study that Elsevier undertook in 2019, and we're delighted today to be able to share the results with you. This session is now in the framework of the virtual week that we're running with Condrick Site. I'm Lesley Thompson. I work for Elsevier in the UK, and I look after our government and academic relationships across the UK. I'm delighted on behalf of Elsevier to be able to work with the National Consortia for Scientific and Technical Information and thank them for inviting us to partner with them in this important event for the scientific community in Mexico. Elsevier is a leader in information and analytics for customers across the globe and health ecosystems, and we welcome you to this 1-hour session. Firstly, let me introduce the team for today. Adrian Mulligan, who also works for Elsevier, gave up a considerable amount of time in November to produce the report on research futures and what it might mean, questionnaring and taking opinions from researchers from around the world. And it's these results we'd like to share with you today. In addition, I'm delighted to have two excellent panelists. Firstly, Martin Hamilton, who's a UK futurist, who's highly informed and an advisor on innovation and digital developments across the higher education and research sectors. And Martin joined us for a conversation when we talked about this report in the UK about a year ago. And then my newest colleague in Elsevier, Carlos Henrique de Brito Cruz, a physicist who was rector of the University of Campinas in Brazil, and who spent 15 years then as scientific director at the São Paulo Research Foundation and joined Elsevier very recently. I think we're in for a really interesting session, but in addition, this is a session for all of you to participate and take part. So you are part of the team that we're going to work with today. So without that, I'd like to hand over to Adrian, who's going to present the findings of the Research Futures study. Adrian.
Everyone can hear me and see me? Great. Hello, everyone. So I'm going to talk for about 15 or 20 minutes. You'll see a little translation running underneath the screen. Hopefully that works okay. That's a PowerPoint translation facility working for us. So 15 to 20 minutes of me talking. Then, as Lesley said, we'll have a Q&A session. So, but just by way of introduction to this study, so rarely in the history of science, technology, and medicine have we witnessed such rapid and profound change as we have done over the last few years. There's been advances in technology, funding pressures have shifted, there's been political uncertainty, population shifts, and societal challenges on a global scale. Now, all these elements are combining in certain ways to transform how research information is both created and exchanged. So what we wanted to do is to take you on the kind of future scoping journey that we went through at Elsevier to look at the future, and we want to share with you those findings. There is actually a report available which you can also access if you want to, which is available via the link here in the bottom right hand corner. So that's up on the Elsevier website. There are two reports. There's a short one, which is a summary, which is around about 30 or so pages, and then there's a much longer report which runs to about 150 pages. So if you need a little bit of bedtime reading, maybe you want to read the longer report. So the kind of format for this presentation is just to kind of talk a little bit about why we did research futures, why Elsevier did it, our approach, and then spend a bit of time going through the 3 scenarios that we developed as part of our study. And then, as Lesley mentioned, we'll have a session. The bulk of the session today will be Q&A, and we're using an application called Menti, where we'll get you to vote on particular questions. So be prepared to get your mobile phones out or to get onto your another screen on your laptop to answer those questions. Okay, so the the way that we did this study was to kind of work closely with Ipsos Mori. They're a global kind of market and opinion research specialists, and they have a lot of knowledge about scenario planning, which is the way we chose to look at the future. Now, I have to be honest, when Elsevier originally took on this research project, it was a little while ago, about 18 months ago, 2 years ago, that we started thinking about it. Is really to help shape our own future. But as we developed the project, we realized there was a lot of value in sharing our findings much more broadly, hence just kind of talking about it today. And I think, what's important to understand is the way we wanted to think about the future was not in terms of a very defined future, but, how things could be. And the best way of doing that, as I mentioned, is through scenario planning. And the reason for that is that it allows you to look at possibilities, look at possible things that could happen and plausible futures. So when we talk about these future scenarios, they have the potential to unfold, but it's worth bearing in mind that they're not really predictions. Just allow us to think about the future in different ways. So no single scenario is going to be correct. That's pretty clear to me, but it's aspects of the different scenarios that we have could come true, and they might combine in a variety of ways which we hadn't really thought about. And it's important to realize that the future scenarios are built on current trends, so a number of these trends will be quite familiar to you, and I think it's just a way that they combine, which is the interesting thing in terms of how we develop the scenarios. So why scenarios? What's the value of them? Really, it's about thinking about the steps that you need to take today in order to be successful in the future, and that's regardless of whether you're an institute or an individual researcher. It's just about a way of thinking about the future. So let me walk you through the process in terms of how we did it. So it was quite an extensive process. So it took us best part of a year to do this project, and the very first step was an extensive literature review. So we spent 2 or 3 months reading up what's being published at the moment, consulting government websites to understand what their policies were going to be going forward. And from that, we kind of developed an overview of some of the kind of broad themes and areas of interest, and utilized it to develop a research script, a survey instrument, which we used for our next phase, which was to speak to experts. So we spoke to 56 experts altogether from a variety of different backgrounds, and they were very varied. So from funding agencies, from very established tech companies, traditional tech companies like IBM. We spoke to startups, particularly in kind of information space. We spoke to academic leadership, and that included the heads of the research office, research administrators, librarians, and of course we spoke to researchers as well at all different stages in their career. So researchers at the coalface, so to speak. And it was very important to us that we get a global view of what these experts were thinking. So they came from North America, they came from Europe, they came from some people from South America, and then from APAC as well. So from these interviews, we got them to think about what might happen in the future and what was keeping them awake at night. And these started to form into kind of much more embryonic themes which we then used to go to the next phase of the research, which was a survey that we conducted amongst over 2,000 researchers. Again, it was global, and we asked the participants to think about a lot of the same topics that we had uncovered with the experts. Now, with the research kind of participants in the study, we had to be very clear about what these future possibilities might be, and we really wanted to kind of harvest different perspectives on the same topic. And the way we chose to do this was to get them to think about the future in terms of what might happen, whether they want a particular future to happen, and then what they will do to make that happen. And a good way of thinking about it, just to kind of bring it into some kind of form, was to think about data. So we asked researchers, do you think data will be freely available in the future? And most researchers said yes to that question. Yeah, we think data is going to be available. Is it something that you would want? And yeah, most researchers agree that that would be something very positive. It'd be good. They can see the raw data that's behind an experiment. They can reanalyze it themselves and maybe publish their own research. But it's very important for transparency. So again, another big tick. And the third dimension of looking at that same topic would be to say, well, okay, so will you publish your data in the future? Can you imagine in 10 years' time that you'll be publishing all your data? And then, okay, so the perspective was slightly different. There's less agreement that would be the case. So taking these three things together helped us understand what the possibilities of the future might be. And so then what we did was, in the last stage, was took all the themes that we'd learned, and we came together in workshops which involved both external people from Elsevier and internal Elsevier employees to kind of workshop these areas and these themes out. And as part of the project, we identified kind of 19 drivers that fed into these 6 themes, which you can see on the slide here. Let me just walk you through what those themes were. So funding for the future is the first one, which you see in red. Then open science, pathways to open science, how researchers work, the technology, the use of technology, how that's going to play out, the research information system of the future, how that's going to look, and then the academy, the role of the university in itself in terms of education, etc. And there were drivers into each of those themes, and it was these drivers and themes that we combined to think about the possible futures. And actually, each one of those themes that you see there represents an essay in that big full report that I mentioned right at the start, the one that was 150 pages. So if you don't want to read the whole report, you can dip into any one of these themes, these topics, as a standalone essay, if you like, if you just want to read it and digest something a little bit closer. But returning back to the workshops, what we wanted to do is make sure they were rooted in the trends that we're seeing today. And so these drivers were absolutely instrumental. But we wanted to get the participants in these workshops to think about dimensions of uncertainty. So where you think about the future, when you're not quite sure which way is it going to go. Is it going to go this way, or is it going to go this way, the opposite way? So let me just kind of show you what those dimensions look like. So technology, which is going up and down the screen here. So in the future, is technology going to be so revolutionary? It's going to be a massive jump forward in AI and machine learning. It's going to completely change the research paradigm and actually much broader? Or is it going to be evolutionary, progressing at the way that we've seen over the last 10 years? So from within the kind of workshop context, we weren't sure which way it was going to go. So these were two extremes in either case. If you look across on the across the screen, if you like, on the x-axis, you're looking at whether things are going to be open, everything's going to be transparent in the future, whether it's going to be controlled, whether individual researchers or institutions may not release all their data, or things are not going to be all open access. And then finally, the third dimension, when we're thinking about the future, was whether or not things were going to be converged and coherent in the future. So lots of organizations, nation states are going to be aligned perhaps on moonshot projects, or whether it's going to be a little bit more fragmented, so people are going to be trying to do their own thing at different institutes and at different nation states. So that's the way we got the individuals to think about the future, and as the way these trends are going to combine, that allowed us to think about these different scenarios. And as I said, we came up with 3 scenarios. So let me talk a little bit about those scenarios and how they are. How we develop, not how we developed them, but what they are, and how we kind of came to them in terms of those key themes that emerged. So the 3 themes were Brave Open World, Tech Titans, and Eastern Ascendants. And in the main report, you can go into each of these scenarios in a little bit more detail. You get a summary, a detailed description, and actually imagine personal story that describes that scenario in the future. And also you'll see some signposts in there to indicate whether a particular scenario is unfolding. And I'll touch upon each of those elements in the next few slides. So if I turn our attention first to kind of Brave Open World, and in this world, we imagine a world where state funders and philanthropic organizations have joined forces. So this is where there's a kind of coherent, cohesive future. People are aligned, organizations are aligned, and they've kind of worked together to push through the creation of platforms where the research that they funded must be published open access. What form that that open access takes varies by region. So, for example, in Europe, it's mostly gold, while in North America and Asia Pacific, it is generally green. And when we say green in this context, it means that the author's version of the manuscript is made freely available via the organizations that publish them. In this world, we see that technology is kind of more revolutionary, but it's augmenting and supporting science and research, and it means these platforms are being able to make massive leaps forward. They're flourishing, they're interoperable, they're allowing the showcasing of research. It's very easy to access all this content, and it's built around preprints, and we see them thriving in this world. They're still linked to the final article, the final version, which is still considered the authoritative version, if you like. But we see articles start to break down, so they get broken down into constituent parts, and that means you get micro articles. You might get an article that's about just the data, or you might actually see in this world notebook style articles which are very dynamic, and you get different parts of the article being updated at different stages in the research workflow. Research quality is still very important in this world, as you would expect, but the measure of performance is a little bit different to what we have currently. So at the moment, journal publications plays a really key role, particularly citations, the number of papers you publish, the quality of those papers that you publish. But in this world, we see the role of journals diminishing somewhat, and a career of a researcher is dependent not on how many publications that you're publishing. Instead, it's increasingly dependent on disseminating information along the researcher workflow. So not just a final article at the end, but at each stage in the process. And increasingly, research is assessed against societal impact standards. So we've got a flavor of how this world might look. How do we know whether it's unfolding? And we have to remember this study was done, a lot of the work was done for this study 18 months ago. And when we come up with the signposts for this future, one of the things that we identified is that, a kind of catalyst for this brave open world would be a flu pandemic. And we imagined then that kind of state bodies, NGOs would come together to support research in this area, to help fight the flu pandemic. We'd see repositories consolidate and be brought together. So, in this instance, we managed to kind of make a relatively good prediction. As these things unfold and as they become more embedded, we see the tech companies become very closely aligned with funders and universities to really develop advanced workflow tools in the future. So in this world, the role of technology is very much augmenting and supplementing the advance of research. Okay, so if I turn to the next scenario, which is tech titans, which is a slightly different vision of the future. So in this world, technology is revolutionary again, but it transforms it in a slightly different way than perhaps we saw in the brave open world. So in this scenario, we see that industry and philanthropic foundations are the principal funders of research. So state funding has reduced considerably in this future, and that has far-reaching consequences for the research community. There's been significant advances in machine learning and artificial intelligence, and some very sophisticated products being released by commercial companies that are driving innovation. But differently to Brave Open World, it has a really different impact here. So, innovations, these large tech companies, data analytic companies, and in this environment, those advances that they are making are at the cost of jobs, not only kind of more broadly in society, but actually in research. They become the curators and distributors of knowledge in this world. Preprint servers, we imagine in this world, similar to the Brave Open world, play a really key role, perhaps even more so in this world. And it's around the preprints that a lot of research is now being published, and there's analytical layers being added on top of these preprints that are being published. And actually preprints largely replaces the role of traditional research journals in this world. And this enables this technology shift to this AI-driven environment, particularly the evaluation of research outputs. So we see AI replacing humans to a large extent in terms of peer review. And we also see AI and machine learning driving forward research too. So it's kind of data-driven hypotheses being formed by machines in this world. And also because it's a commercially orientated world in terms of tech titans have got the controls of distribution and actually having a much bigger say in the funding. Not all aspects of research are open, quite as we saw in the Brave Open world, and they wanting to maintain the kind of advantage for themselves in terms of maintaining and controlling the key data and not releasing it until they've gained fully the financial advantage of these developments. And we see in this world as well, because technology has made such inroads that data analysis, big massive data sets have been harmonized, ontologies have been complete, and that's really enabled science as a service in this environment. So researchers are no longer having to work at institutes; they can work independently. They can sit in a cafe, and you can see that they are being able to do lots of complicated analyses that that institutes would have been done before. And we see institutions which have a real strong investment in life sciences kind of perhaps slightly struggling in this world. So how do we know whether this world is unfolding? We'll give some examples of signposts here. So, for example, we see self-driving cars becoming the norm in North America. Might be an indication that this world is unfolding. We see AI play an increasing role in the sharing of science and the evaluation of science, but it's not without its hiccups. So we imagine a scenario where AI is at the heart of some research which changes fundamentally the direction of some sector or industry. We've used the example here of aviation, and actually some research that came about, which was AI reviewed, was subsequently found to be flawed. And then as a consequence, that sets back AI and technology in terms of public confidence and trust. But later on, because there's still advances being made, public trust is regained simply because of the advances that AI has allowed to happen in terms of cancer treatment, which is something we see perhaps more at the end of the decade. Ultimately, it triumphs in this world. And then finally, in this last slide, it's slightly last scenario, we're looking at Eastern ascendance. And here we see the rise of the East, but particularly China, and it becomes a driving force for change in the region. It's already happening, I can honestly say that. So China's desire to transform into a knowledge-based economy has led to really heavy public investment in research and development, and the system and processes that they put in place really allowed them to capitalize on this in industrial and economic terms. And as a result, the proportion of research papers that are being published are much greater in terms of what's coming out of China. Not only does the volume of research increase, but the quality of that research is improving. And it's all based on the fact that they're investing much higher amounts in R&D than we would expect in the West and in Europe, particularly so North America, and South America, and Europe. And it's really changing the landscape of scientific research. And actually what we see in this world is that China and the Asia Pacific becomes a magnet for researchers. So rather than researchers going to MIT or Oxford and now heading over to Beijing. This world is a bit more fractious, so we see geopolitical divides. So China's going in a slightly different direction perhaps than Europe and North America. So there's no alignment and grand challenges, lots of different practices in terms of communicating research, so it's not all open access, and nation states really are competing for scientific advantage in this world. There's a lot of controlled distribution. Data is held back, not so much by corporations in this instance, but by nation states, as I said. And they really want to maximize the value out of the research. And in this world, we imagined individual research outputs continue to be assessed separately, but they're always linked to the final article, and publications plays more of a kind of key role in this environment. And in terms of the signposts for it, we see R&D, kind of investment increase in China, and we're already seeing that. So as a proportion of GDP, the intensity of research development spend increases. We see in this world the amount of co-authorships on papers and collaborations diminish somewhat, particularly between China and US. And we see in this world going forward in the future that the research institutes in China become dominant in the ranking lists that are so common that we see today, such as the Times Higher and the QS ranking lists. So that gives you a flavor of the three scenarios. As I said, you can go into the reports to get a much deeper understanding. So thank you for bearing with me and allowing me to walk through the presentation. I hope I didn't speak too fast and that you're able to capture a lot of it. So now I'm going to open up the session back to Lesley so that we can get the views of the panel.
Okay, thank you, Adrian. It's amazing if you think that research was done 18 months ago, how many things have transformed so quickly in the last year. It's really reflective to go back and think about where we were 18 months ago and where we are now. I now want to turn to our panelists, and I'd first like to ask Martin to give his general observations on what he thinks is likely to be happening, what he disagrees with from Adrian's study, and a general synopsis from his viewpoint. Martin.
Oh, thanks, Lesley, and hello, everybody. So I think it's really profound how many of the changes that were predicted in the report have happened so quickly. You know, it has been a matter of weeks, months at the outside, when we've said, okay, we can't travel to academic conferences. Maybe we can't even visit our campuses. We can't go to our offices. And these digital tools that were a future, they're now. These are the tools that we use every day, like the tool we're using now to communicate from around the world, beam into your offices and living rooms. So this is a very profound shift in a very short space of time. I thought although the report only briefly talks about things like the flu pandemic scenario, I thought the climate change elements are very relevant, and actually much of what we've seen as a result of the flu pandemic, or I should say the coronavirus pandemic, has mirrored almost the changes that I envisaged happening as a result of climate change. The idea that it's impossible for people to routinely travel intercontinental long-haul plane flights simply won't be a thing because the carbon emissions are too great. Simple things like that we've taken for granted. The pandemic has taken them away from us again almost overnight. And we seem to be getting on okay. We seem to be doing all right. And that really is very interesting. We kind of didn't really want to let go of our traditional ways of working, but we've had to, and we have adapted. The other thing that two things I was particularly struck by. The first one is artificial intelligence. And again, we tend to talk about artificial intelligence as some kind of future thing. It's going to happen in the future. There may be robots, and it's already here right now. You know, you pull your phone out of your pocket, and half of the apps on your phone are already using AI. The office tools that you use, like Word or Google Docs, they're built on top of AI nowadays. So we might think of AI in research as some kind of future possibility, but the tools we use every day already employ AI extensively. So it's here now. We might not like it, but it's here. When we think about the tools that we use every day, of course, then we use tools like Excel. Microsoft Excel is very widely used, and maybe there's a little bit of AI in there too. But remember that Excel gives us a very graphic demonstration of how tools can mislead us and confuse us. If you think about how genomics has struggled massively with the names of genes being altered by Excel, being auto-corrected, to the extent that we're simply changing what we call them so that Excel won't get confused. So maybe we'll have to do something similar with AI. The other thing I wanted to comment on was the kind of rise of the East theme, the third theme that Adrian talked about. I think it's actually, maybe it's a little bit more than that. It's not so much the rise of China or any one particular part of the world. I think maybe it's more about populism, and it's about people who would seek to divide us and set us against each other. And we know around the world there are quite a few leaders who've risen to power by setting one group of people against another. In Mexico, you have one just to the north who's been very successful simply by pitting people against each other. And I think it's really quite challenging now that we're moving to, and COVID has created this situation, we're moving to a very open culture. We're moving to preprints for everything because we need to get the data out there. We need to get the results out there. But that means that that openness is open to abuse. So people who would want to seed that data, seed those preprints with misinformation, they have an open door. We've made it really easy for them to do that. So those were my immediate thoughts. I'll hand back to you, Lesley.
That's great. Thank you, Martin. And now, Britta, can I turn to you to give me your views on what you've heard from the report and Adrian present today? And can I just ask the audience, in a minute, we're going to go to some private voting. So if you could download the Menti app, then we'll come to that in a minute. Thank you, Britta.
Thank you very much, Lesley. It's a pleasure to be here participating in this virtual meeting on the future of research and science and technology. I think that the report that Adrian just described brings to us so many interesting points and challenging views about the impact of the changes which are happening in the world, in the way research will be performed and will be used. And at the same time, it's always interesting to see that a report which is done with such care and interest can be challenged in such a big way by the real events of the world. Because many of the things which are there are changed now, are different. It seems to me that one of the elements which I found very interesting and also enticing to further thought is the element, the part of the report that deals, especially in the first scenario, that deals with the open science concept. And while it is very positive and very progressive that the scene or the landscape painted in the report about the future of research with more open access or open science, it came to my mind, and perhaps Adrian could comment later on the idea that also open science brings a number of relevant challenges for researchers in the southern part of the world. For example, when one of the signposts mentions 3/4 of the articles will be published in green open access, open access increases the cost of research for researchers in the South by a sizable amount. So one of the countries which was listed there in the signpost was India, but it could be Brazil, it could be Mexico. And publishing green open access requires funds that not always those countries have for their science. So I was wondering how we could envision the effects of those changes in excluding or including researchers in developing countries of the world. Because of course, on one side, it creates more opportunities for inclusion because access to the publications will be open, but access to publish will not be open. And that is, I don't know where the balance will be with respect to that. So that was one point that I found deserves more thought or more, I don't know, imagination or thinking about the report. Of course, there's also the scenario that deals with the decrease in public funding and the increase in industrial funding, especially. There's also a mention to international foundations, but it doesn't seem to me the way the world is moving now that international philanthropic foundations will have a very large role in funding, but industry will. That seems very credible to me. And that again is a scenario in which the questions that come to my mind relate to, okay, what's going to happen in this scenario in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia? It's so that my view is sometimes and almost always conditioned by the fact that I have been living in Brazil. So we see sometimes many good things happening in the north, but the benefit of those do not reach the south very quickly. Or sometimes they reach the south in a different way, which is not as positive as might be thought of. So, and the third point that I wanted to bring here is that some of the changes that would be kind of what would be the update of the report when we factor in what's happening to the world now. And one of the things is that virtual meetings tended to level the ground for researchers in poorer countries. I mean, a researcher in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia, in India would have a difficult time participating in so many scientific events as they are participating now because it became virtual. And that is a factor of inclusion which I think might be factored in a new way of thinking about the world. The fact that two things come to my mind. The first one is, why did we resist to use virtual meetings before the pandemic? Because they are so convenient in many senses. There are many inconvenient ways in which you can think of them, but there are many advantages. One of them being including people who cannot pay the expense of an international travel now can attend to a meeting, can participate, can say things, hear things, talk to people, and so that's one of the things. And why didn't we use that before? And the other question is, will we keep using this afterwards? or will we get back to the old ways of doing things and flying planes and emitting carbon and going to meetings and talking about the problems of global change and the climate and everything? So that's one of the thoughts that came to my mind. And the last point that I would bring here is that in an update of the report, we might want to consider not only artificial intelligence, which certainly will be relevant, but will the world find other ways to produce energy that will make emissions less relevant for the development of the world? And again, I bring here a view from developing countries, because in developing countries is where the use of energy is going to increase strongly in the future, because as people want to have a more comfortable life similar to that many people enjoy in the north, the first thing that happens is that more energy is used. If this is energy generated the way it's being generated today, the climate is not going to be happy about that. But there are technologies which are coming up in energy which might allow the south of the world or the developing countries to advance in their well-being without creating proportional additional emissions of carbon. So those are some of the points that I would bring to the table, but they mostly relate to the role of the developing world in those changes which are analyzed in the report. Thank you very much, Lesley.
Thank you. So I think already you can see what this report does. Every time you look at this report, every time you discuss it with somebody, different what-ifs come up. It provokes thinking, and that's really important. But now's the opportunity for us to provoke you in your thinking. But before I hand over to Adrian to talk you through the first question, could I ask if you've got any questions you want to raise? If you put them in chat, then we can pick them up towards the end of this session. Adrian, do you want to now ask the audience?
Yeah, so just what we've done is we've set up a Menti app. So you have two ways of voting. So you can go to the website that's appearing on the screen and enter in the code 445998, and you should see a question. Just answer that question. You can, if you prefer, you can go in the alternative route, which is just hold your camera up to your screen and take a shot of the QR code, and that'll take you straight through to the survey, and you'll be able to respond to the kind of first question that we had on the survey, which is, which scenario is the most challenging for your organization? So we've got some votes in. So what I thought I would do would be to share with you now the kind of votes that we've had on this particular question. So we've got a number of votes in, and as you can see, the unbalanced, most people are saying that the Brave Open World scenario is most challenging for your institution, which reflects on what Bito was saying. And it's what's quite interesting is when we've done this poll previously to different audiences, whether they be in Europe or in North America, what we found is that generally the Tech Titan scenario has been shown to be the most challenging for participants or people that are in the audience. And when we've kind of got polling before, the audiences tend to be made up of researchers, librarians, and research leaders. So I would say in South America, particularly Mexico, the Brave Open World is quite a different scenario which is felt to be challenging to other regions around the world. So back to you, Lesley.
Brilliant. So I think that picked up exactly the conversation we had with the panelists. It's always very easy to sit in one part of the world and think that you're in one place and you're not. Excuse me. Okay. I now want to turn to Adrian to put the second question up, and then we're going to have a conversation with Martin and with Brito. Adrian.
Yeah, so the second question is, in 10 years' time, do you think research will be valued for enhancing human knowledge or its commercial application?
This time I'm going to go on. Let's ask Brito where he would place his bets on this one. Where do you think the value for research would be?
I would place in the third alternative an equal weight for each one of them. I have the view that as people tend to understand more about research, there is a tendency to value more in a more balanced way the application and the creation of knowledge.
And Martin, where would you go with this one?
Okay, so I'm going to be, in English we would say contrary, and invent a fourth option. So I think the problem that we have is, as a species, we face huge challenges. We face huge challenges principally through climate change, and the solutions to those challenges may not be commercially viable. They may just be things we have to do, and they may not particularly enhance human knowledge. But we need to do the research, and we need to figure out how to take things that perhaps we know how to do in theory, like carbon capture and storage, and scale them up massively. There may not be billion-dollar businesses to come out of it. We kind of already know how to do them, but we just don't know how to do them at scale. So my fourth option is that I think research will be valued for the continued survival of the human.
And Adrian, where are we with our voting audience?
Yeah, so let's so if I just show the results, it should.
This is really exciting doing this live.
Yeah, so this is. So if I do, it should. So there we go. So that's the. So commercial application. It seems to be the. Oh, it's suddenly shifted. it's even. So it's in actual fact, it's I'd say that's quite evenly distributed across the 3 options. So hopefully, in Mentate the question should be appearing in Spanish. I hope. So even though you can't see the question in Spanish here, in this version, you should be able to on the website and on the application on the phone. Okay, so yeah, so equal. So I guess the next question would be, how does the global research community respond to this question? Because we asked this question to researchers globally, and what I'll do is I will show you how 2,000 researchers from across the world voted on this particular question, and you can see it's very even. So it's very similar to what we saw in the study results here. So not that dissimilar. So if I shall I move on to the next question, Lesley?
So can I ask if anybody's got any questions you want to ask the panelists or Adrian, to put them in the chat function now? We'll do one more question, then we're going to open it up to questions from the audience. Third question, Adrian. I'm amazed this technology is working.
Yes, I'm kind of pleased that it is. So in 10 years, what will be the creative force driving forward new knowledge? So this really goes to the technology question that we had about the role of AI. So will it be researchers that will be the creative force for driving forward new knowledge, or will it be new technologies, e.g. AI or machine learning?
Yeah. Let's ask Martin this one. Martin, where do you think the driving new knowledge will come from in 10 years' time? And you can only answer among these 3 questions.
I'm going to choose from one of the 3. So I think AI is absolutely fascinating from this perspective, because new insights will come from AI that we cannot explain. And this is something very new to us. Normally, we're used to being able to say, okay, what's going on here? When you look inside a neural network, it's just like a big tangled mess of connections. You cannot ask a neural network to explain how it decided that it could see a brain tumor on a scan. It can't tell you. So we will learn lots of new things. We may even start to credit algorithms and AI, machine learning models, as authors in their own right. But we won't be able to ask them, how did you do that?
And Barreto.
Yeah, I would go for the third option, equally or more or less equally. And I'm not sure I can defend this in a completely rational way, but part of my answer relates to the fact that being a human, I want to be part of what's going on. And being a scientist and a researcher, I also want to be part of what's going on and not living in a world in which, I don't know, I sit at home and some computer somewhere will tell us what's going to go. But that's the way I see it.
Okay, that's brilliant. And do we have the results from the audience, Adrian?
Yes. So let me just see if this should work. Let me see. Just, 1 second. There we go. So, wow, again, that's interesting. A little bit different from what we've seen elsewhere. So, new technologies will be perceived as the creative force, not followed far behind by equal, either being equally likely. But they're surprising given that where we've seen people vote before, most often community thinks that researchers will continue to play a very important role in creating new knowledge. And shall I share with you the results from the study, or do you like to?
No, let's have the results from the study.
Okay, so in terms of what we saw from the study, researchers felt themselves would be the major force for driving forward true knowledge, but just slightly less than a third felt it would be technology that would be the creative force. So very interesting, the two different views that we got, the global community and again our attendees for this session, quite marked contrast.
Absolutely. Gosh, that's stunningly different. That's really interesting. Now I'm looking at my chat box and I can't see any questions from the audience. Either my technology is not working or there are no questions. Can I just check, are there any questions from the audience? No, nothing. Okay, so I think I just want to now close with some closing remarks, and then I'm going to hand to each of my co-workers in this team to just make a last minute's word of statements. So I think what we've seen here today is just enormous similarities and enormous differences between one specific part of the world and what we've done globally. I happen to be somebody who believes in the driving force of humanity and the global world of research. So actually, I would put all of my money every time on humanity and the creativeness of young people. But I think what we've seen today is actually this tool enables you to think to the future and think about how you would position yourself or your organization about it differently. Now let me turn to Martin and ask you what your observations are, having spent this hour with this great audience.
So I'm very struck by something that we've kind of been aware of this for a long time. This question of if you're a researcher, do you exist to work for an institution? Well, no, not really. If you're a researcher, you exist to do research, and the institution you work for kind of comes and goes. You tend to move around. And I think this is the really interesting question. Do you need an institution? can you be an independent researcher? And many people need labs and they need facilities. But look at us here today. How many of us, our facility looks kind of like a laptop and the internet, and maybe there are some databases and journals that we get to online. Did we need an institution? Did we need a patron, a sponsor? In the sense that maybe we would have 5, 10, 15 years ago. Maybe this is the beginning of a great new era for the independent researcher.
There we are. Brito, your observations, reflection.
Thank you, Lesley. Yeah. Well, Martin came up with some very interesting ideas. Isaac Newton didn't have an institution, right? He did his research at home with the prism and the light and everything. So we might be going back to those days. But the point that I find very interesting here is how much can we learn on speculating about the future, and how many new ideas come each time you say what you think the future is going to be. And that is really very, very interesting. And I think that one of the things that struck me is that you have to, that's the thing about science, right? Science is, some people say it's the art of asking nature, of questioning nature. And here the same. If you ask people with 3 alternatives, you might not be presenting the one alternative that will tell you more about what is really interesting to know. So I would stay with Martin on his idea of the problem-oriented research that will help mankind to live better, longer, happy, in a happier way. Thank you, Lesley.
Thank you. And Adrian, any final reflections from you?
Yeah, so it was a very interesting series of votes that came through there, and it reminded me how, not one size fits all, and you get different views from different communities around the world. And since we did this study just over the summer, we've done some more research, and it's interesting. Some of the themes that we identified as being critical when we did this study originally continue to dominate the way the community thinks about the future. So, in respect to the role of kind of machine learning and artificial intelligence, in the study we did most recently, which we'll be sharing probably in the next 2 to 3 months, artificial intelligence is seen to be playing an even more important role kind of going forward than perhaps we originally hypothesized. And we see that researchers believe that they're getting more dependent on corporate funding for research. And some of the indicators that we were looking at, signposts, are showing that actually China continues to accelerate in terms of its R&D. So China being an outward-looking country and trying to be an outward-looking country probably means that there's probably a lot more opportunity for partnership with China kind of going forward because of the vast amount of infrastructure they're building and the amount that they're investing in R&D. And we actually see China supersede the US in terms of research articles this year.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's brilliant. Okay, so it's my job now to thank the audience. I hope you've found this an interesting session. I hope we've given you pause for thought. It's always good to have time to reflect. I'd like to thank Martin, Brito, and Adrian for being fantastic team members. And I'd like to thank the consortia for inviting us along to do this. And we hope that you have a really successful week and you leave the week better prepared for the future than you would have been if you hadn't taken part in this session today. Thank you very much for attending. It's been a real pleasure to spend time with you all today. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Cheers.
Bye for now.